Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, and welcome to this webinar on realising food secure communities in Aotearoa by Kore Hiakai Zero Hunger Collective. To start us off today, I'm just going to start with the karakia, me karakia tātou. No mai e raro, ke ha ke roto, ke ha ke waho. Kia tau mai te mauri tū, te mauri noho, te mauri tangata, te mauri atua, te mauri o rangi, te mauri o tangaroa, te mauri o tāne, te mauri o papa tuanuku, te mauri o tū, te mauri o rongo, te mauri o haumie tiki tiki, te mauri o hine ahu one, kia tau mai te ao, kia tau mai te marama, kia ho mai mā te katoa, haumie, huie, tai ki e. Kia ora everyone and welcome to this webinar. Ko Sophie McCarthy toku ingoa. I am a kai hononga community food networker at Kore Hiakai and I will be guiding you through this webinar.
Ko Sonya toku ingoa. I'm a kairangahau or researcher at Kore Hiakai and I'm the author of the report on realising food secure communities in Aotearoa.
Today we are joined by two interpreters from iSign Interpreting Services helping us with the webinar. Thank you, Laura Sherrington and Rangi Musgrave. Thank you. Kore Hiakai Zero Hunger Collective is a collective of people and organisations working to address the root causes of food-related poverty in Aotearoa and strive for a food secure Aotearoa for all through tītiriti grounded sustainable solutions. For this webinar, we're going to be starting with a grounding exercise before sharing some of the key takeouts of the report and how you can apply it to your mahi, followed by some time for questions and finishing with a closing karakia. So let's begin with the grounding exercise. I invite you all to close your eyes and take a deep breath, bringing yourselves into the present moment. Imagine that you are walking down the road in your community that has nourishing, sustainable, local food, and where everyone has an abundant choice of nourishing kai. Are you in a coastal area? Or are you inland by the bush? Or are you in the city? Or somewhere else? You continue on and arrive at the place where you are getting your kai. What do you see? What do you experience in that place? What and who else is around you? In your own time, take another deep breath. Feel the earth beneath you and slowly bring yourself back into the present moment, opening your eyes when you're ready. We now invite you to share in the chat what stood out to you from that experience. So if you could just put those notes in the chat, that would be much appreciated. Sonya, what stood out to you from that experience?
What I found is I was thinking about the fact that I live relatively close to the coast, and I was thinking about pawa, I was thinking about fishing boats and the opportunity that that has for, kind of creating local food security where we are.
Yeah, I think that's an important notice about food security looks different in each environment, and for you that was a coastal area, and
Yeah,
it was unique to that.
yeah.
Thank you. So thank you for participating. We hope you enjoyed this exercise. Exploring our ideal is something we do a lot at Kore Hiakai, and tapping into and using our imagination is a useful tool to realising food secure communities. I will now pass on to Sonya, who will be doing the presentation.
Okay, so what I'm going to be talking about today is discussing some of the findings of what we can learn about locally led reports, plans and strategies to realise food secure communities in Aotearoa, and also some options for applying this in our own mahi. So for Kore Hiakai, this has been part of a wider project where what we're looking at is how do we build a collective understanding of how we might realise food secure communities? How do we measure the progress towards that? And what are the tools and levers that we can use to get there? As we started this, we realised there'd been a huge amount of work done in the last few years by communities that we felt held a lot of insight about how we realise food secure communities. And we really wanted to be able to elevate the voice of communities on this issue and bring it into the wider space. So to go about it, we started with online research and asking out through our networks. We were looking at terms such as food security, kai sovereignty, food resilience, sustainable local food, and other similar terms. We limited the research to the last 10 years, and we found a whole heap of reports by community organisations, often supported by MSD grants. There was a big focus on kai by Healthy Families programs. There was about 5 local authorities that have done mahi in this area. And there was regional health organisations and a few other organisations. We were looking at plans or strategies that were either fully or partially focused on food security across a whole locality, rather than plans that were more around an individual initiative for food security. We did include some reports that were more around plans to alleviate food insecurity, for example, through greater support to food banks. But we were mostly interested in the insights from people experiencing food insecurity, rather than actually having that as the focus of the report. Of the reports, some were led by Māori for Māori, probably most notably a kaitiakitanga plan by Te Aotearoa ki Whakarangatai, but also there was many that were influenced by Te Ao Māori or conducted in partnership with mana whenua. We weren't able to find any bi-Pacific, for Pacific documents, and if anyone knows of any, we'd be happy to hear of that. Do think with food systems reports that they can come from quite a lot of different angles. We found that most had a health or a social lens. Some had a climate change or environment focus, and there were a number that were also focused on supporting local food production. So we've also thought it'd be useful to give an overall sense of what localities see food secure communities as looking like. So, as per the exercise, we feel that the more that we can visualise and understand that positive future we're trying to work towards, the more likely we are to be able to bring this about. So for local communities, a Te Ao Māori understanding of kai and revitalisation of kai sovereignty is key. And this is really quite fundamentally different from the current industrial food systems that we sit within. We found that there were 5 values that were quite common in a number of these locality reports as guiding our food systems. And those values are rangatiratanga, whanaungatanga, manaakitanga, kaitiakitanga, and kotahitanga. Critical part of this is te tiriti leadership. So leadership and authority of food systems sitting with mana whenua and other local people. and a need for a shift in mindset, really. So prioritising respect and care for Papatuanuku, or Mother Nature as a living being, and as the source of our kai. And, seeing that as critical to our own health and well-being and that of future generations. And in doing so, we support mana whenua to actively fulfil responsibilities as kaitiaki or guardians. We also looked at what food secure communities looks like for people, whānau and communities, the economy and the environment. There were 6 themes that were recurring across the vision statements in the report. Most important of these, however, I would say, is the idea of local. So local food produced for the local benefit of local people. And then, those other values included affordable, connected, healthy, regenerative, and resilient. So for people, whānau and communities, in food secure communities, we have more time, we're living less stressful and more sustainable lives. We're eating good, affordable, sustainable local food, and we've got time to garden, to fish, to hunt, to gather, to shop for, and then to cook our food, and then also to sit down with our whānau to eat. We're sharing and we're connecting over our food in our communities and with our whānau. We're learning and passing on our food skills and knowledge about our traditions and values, including mātauranga Māori. For local economies and food secure communities, we've got a diversity of local food producers and businesses that provide healthy, affordable, sustainable food to local communities. There are social food hubs, there's farmers markets, food co-ops, greengrocers, butchers and more. We're celebrating our local food traditions and delicacies. Our food producers and businesses are getting fair returns and they're paying fair wages to their employees. And local food processing facilities and distribution chains are supporting our local businesses to grow. So for the environment and food secure communities, we're protecting our highly productive lands, our biodiversity and our environment, including through the use of regenerative practices such as growing nutrient-dense and organic food. Mahi Hiakai are flourishing. A circular economy is preventing, reusing and redistributing surplus and waste. And in doing so, our food system is becoming more resilient to crisis. So what do local communities identify as the barriers to transforming our food systems? I think what struck me the most was the dominance of supermarkets and other big corporates in our food system, which is seen as having come about over the last 30 or 40 years. So prior to this, local food economies were much stronger, with much more in the way of local fishers supplying local fish shops, greengrocers, butchers accessing meat from local farms, and so on. So now we're exporting the majority of our food, and our supermarkets have centralised our domestic food supply chains. In places such as Te Tai Tokoro, Tairāwhiti, Taumaranui and Southland, they're all discussing feeling like they were in this extraordinary situation of producing large amounts of food which then left their region. Then they were importing back lower quality food and felt like their people were left with high levels of food insecurity. So another thing was that there was a lot of communities that discussed being full of cheap takeaways and not enough access to good, healthy food. For parents who are working full-time and low-paid jobs, they're stressed out and they don't have the time or resources to grow, gather, shop for or cook good food. And over generations, this is leading to a loss of skills, knowledge and tradition. Māori discussed their grief at the loss of cultural knowledge about mahi Hiakai over generations. And this is all impacting on our health and well-being, including obesity, diabetes, and the ability of our tamariki to concentrate at school. So one of the most surprising elements to me was the extent to which central government seems to enable this situation. Felt almost like there was a glass wall in terms of a lot of these, or a glass ceiling in terms of a lot of these reports. Like local government or communities would get so far, but then there was barriers from there. So there was a lot of discussion by communities about the lack of regulation over fast food, sugary and highly processed food. And equally, there was frustration about the high level of regulation over small food businesses such as cheesemakers, or practices such as the use of home kill. And there was a feeling of too much focus on export markets and not enough on supporting local food economies. So next, we'd like to focus on how we overcome some of these barriers through our own mahi. So our intent with producing the report is that it gives a starting point for some of the things to consider about how to realise food security in your own rohi and where to look for further information. We feel like there's a lot that can be learnt from the work that other local communities have done. So we point out in the report some of the interesting work by localities on specific topics, and then have links through the bibliography to their work. We highlighted a couple of organisations that have done really robust processes, such as Healthy Families East Cape, who did some really awesome work in Tairāwhiti, and Pōtiri Trust, who did fabulous work in the Western Bay of Plenty. We think there's an opportunity for more strategies that are guided by values. And some organisations have used value-driven frameworks to guide their mahi, such as pulling from Kore Hiakai and its mana to mana practice framework, or Te Waka Kai Order and its Hua Parakore framework. So what are some of the opportunities to realise food security for community organisations? So there was honestly just so many ideas in the reports, and here's just a few that were discussed. One was around elevating mātauranga Māori with regards to kai. So learning from kaumātua, researching sites and practices for the growing and gathering of kai, sharing knowledge between generations, and celebrating ancestral stories and knowledge. Another one is about starting up food security networks with mana whenua, local government, and others across the food system. There are ways that you can support and learn from each other, advocate for a local food strategy, and input into local policies that impact on the food system. Another one is advocating for a living wage with larger businesses in your area as a significant way to help their employees to be food secure. One that received a lot of attention throughout the reports was this idea of social food hubs. And I think with that, probably the key things is it's around a place for people to gather and learn and share from each other, and also to connect people from across the food system, from growers through to eaters. There was a lot of talk about how this can really just be something that's added to an existing community facility, and it doesn't need to be standalone. And I think some of the reports I found, South Kaipara Good Food and also Kai Auckland talked really eloquently about this. Increasing access to fruit and veg in communities is another opportunity. So fruit and veg co-ops, edible fruit trees in your neighbourhoods, urban farms, and supporting backyard gardening. For local government, really feels like the key opportunity is starting with a local food strategy in partnership with mana whenua. This can be used to build sustainable food systems and apply food systems thinking across the council's portfolio. And it really can have broad benefits, including helping to honour te tiriti, benefiting the economy, the environment, climate change, and the health, prosperity and well-being of people. And to stress this point, I recently came across this quote by the United Nations Development Programme that said that making our food systems more sustainable is among the most powerful ways to change course and make progress towards all 17 Sustainable Development Goals. It was interesting actually looking at the reports of Aotearoa Christchurch. So they implemented a food resilience strategy in 2014. That then influenced their climate strategy and a healthy food and drink plan. University of Canterbury's now got its own strategy, and also there's a thriving community food security sector. Auckland had a climate strategy, and that included a lot of component about sustainable food systems, and Wellington had a food systems action plan. Both of these strategies were developed in partnership with mana whenua, so provide good examples of how to go about that. Tararua is an example of a small community that's done great work looking at how it becomes food secure. So for central government, really what came out most strongly was communities wanting to see a national food strategy. I think there's different focuses for, how one could angle a strategy. I think, for example, in the UK, the focus is on health. Here, I think it's really important that a strategy be focused on strengthening our domestic and our local food production. Alongside this, there's the real need for restructuring central government agencies to better support and grow local food production rather than focusing primarily on export markets. There's opportunities to shift to regenerative food production, partnering with Māori to protect mahi and biodiversity more generally. And there's a huge amount of mahi to be done on food environments, so regulating fast food outlets, highly processed foods, and marketing to children. We thought also that it was worth highlighting some of the similarities between what local communities aspire to and its alignment with international evidence. So there was a report in 2020 that was done by the high-level panel of experts on food security and nutrition of the Committee of World Food Security. And they highlighted, basically what they did is brought together a whole lot of the evidence over the last 10 years about what they saw as the most promising policy directions. Some of the things that they recommended was radically transforming food systems with a focus on equity and agency, and particularly that right to food for everyone. Another thing was around supporting more sustainable practices such as agroecology and regenerative agriculture. Reshaping food production and distribution to support local markets was another priority for them, and they said that that was important to reduce inequalities that can arise through a concentration of markets. They also talked about supporting healthy food environments and nutritious food production. So to finish, local communities aspire to a total transformation of our food systems, driven by Māori values and understanding of kai, and to shift from a centralised and industrial food systems towards more sustainable and local food systems, and international evidence supports this aspiration. So, he kaikae tātou ringaringa. Oops. Any questions?
Thank you, Sonia. As she said, this is a time for people to pop themselves off mute and ask any questions, or you're also welcome to share them in the chat and I can read them out and we'll address those. Yeah. Just while we're waiting, throughout the presentation, there's been some awesome bits of knowledge popping through the chat about what people imagined during the exercise at the start. Just want to read some of these out while we've got a little time. Yeah, so an abundance of growing fresh kai and gardens throughout our communities is a strong theme throughout these. Saw people sharing meals together, enjoying each other's company. So I think that just shows how food really connects us and how important that is when we're thinking about food strategies and things. I imagine a marae where whānau and friends are around with big mara garden, kaumātua, sharing knowledge and fruit trees in abundance. Awesome, thank you. I saw a beautiful field of vegetables growing by the roadside. So there's definitely a theme of how our places and spaces can support. And I think that was a big theme in the report as well. And Sonya's shared something about that. I was in suburbia with many walking or cycling and saying hello to each other. Food shops were bright and airy with affordable fresh food available for all. Walking down to my local farmer through the crops. So yeah, that connection between where our food actually comes from. I think there's a real desire for people to want to know where their food is from, especially as Sonya said, over the last 30 years, there's become that centralised system where we've come pretty disconnected in how we can reconnect with our food. Yeah. Kia ora, Sonya. Read the highly productive lands. To what extent do you think communities understand the importance / rarity of these lands, and what can we do to support / save them?
Honestly, I would sort of say that I'm not an expert on highly productive land, but it certainly came through in the reports that there was a real understanding of the need to protect those lands. And, you know, and I think that they were seen as, you know, part of what a local food system, you know, does. Like, I do think that one of the big opportunities is through those food security networks. I mean, I know here in Te Whanganui Tara, I've been part of a kai security network that started up over the last year or so, and we've been using that as a forum to advocate on issues that we think are important to the food system. I mean, in our case, we recently put in a submission on the open space strategy. Not that that's highly productive land, but you know, but I think that's one thing that we can do.
Yeah. And I think another one to that is with wanting, part of this is wanting you to understand and think about your local community. So maybe if you think that is a really important part in your community, how can you join a network or help to advocate for that? How do you see the role of local and central government in supporting local food initiatives such as community gardens, gardening skills sharing, and at the next level up, building the collaborations needed between the different parts of the system?
Oh, absolutely critical, really. And like, it's been interesting. Like, I do think that those those strategies are actually a good way to do that. You know, like, I think a lot of the local food strategies that are, you know, particularly when they've been done by local government, do actually talk about the importance of those community food initiatives and so on. And also then that obviously gives more momentum once it's in a strategy to be wanting to support that. Yeah, and then, I mean, at a central government level, I mean, we have seen support from MSD in that area in the last few years. And, you know, long may that continue.
Just want to add to that one. We also see this report as an advocacy tool for you. So, yeah, be mindful of how you could use this report to talk to your local government about that. If you had to choose one thing to do first for implementing a local food plan, what would you choose? One of the things that I found really useful was, for example, Healthy Families East Cape. In Tairāwhiti, what they started was almost like a local food systems mapping exercise that was looking at what does our current food system look like. So that included, I think they actually looked through all of the
regulations and policies and so on. Then they talked to a whole lot of people across the food system about what they saw as the issues in the food system. That was almost the basis of a report. And from there, they moved on to a second phase, which was around now that we have an understanding what our food system looks like, how do we co-design the food system that we want?
Another thing we often think about at Kore Hiakai is rather than the what is the who. So who can you get around that table to start thinking about that strategy in your community? Hello, Shabnam Jalili from AUT. Were there any things related to imported food? What does the community feel about that?
I think the main thing about imported food was really just that, I think I sort of mentioned in the seminar or in the presentation that feeling of a lot of the good food going out and then imported food coming in when, obviously it's a lot more sustainable and actually generally healthier to keep, that good local food in the community. There was probably also something about, in terms of imported food, around the quality. It's more likely to be that, they're highly processed or etc. So I think that would be the main things that I got from the reports about that.
Council's long-term plans are one of the ways to have your local council commit to keeping land for the growing of food alongside development. Thank you, Moko. That's a good tip from that question. What engagement have you had or do you have planned for central government?
So with this particular report, we have sent it to a whole lot of government ministers, political parties, etc. We also sent it to every mayor. So we've had some responses from some people. We met with MSD probably, I don't know, a month or 6 weeks ago and gave them this presentation. And I think for us, this now becomes a tool, I think, where we can say, this is the voice that communities and local localities are saying of what they want for food systems.
Also, maybe a note there's a petition at the moment for a
national
food strategy from New Zealand.
Yeah, so that's right.
Potentially check that one out. New to this sector here, the obvious barriers are the unprofitability of farming on a small scale, or at least local expense equals expensive. Is there any scope in Aotearoa for government to subsidise smaller farming businesses that are regenerating the soil, capturing carbon?
In many ways, I don't think of myself as the expert on all of these issues. In many ways, what we were trying to do was harness, insights from communities on these issues. But one thing I would say is that small-scale production in some ways is unsustainable at the moment, partly because we've got a centralised food system. So once we start to have more of those local food distribution chains, the local processing facilities, the local markets and so on, then I think the idea is that what is local becomes more sustainable and more profitable. And also I think if there's more support from central government, so they're looking at how do we right-fit regulations and policies to support small businesses and small food producers, then again, that should hopefully become more profitable for businesses.
Have you seen anywhere central government through MSD has partnered with a local fruit and veggie co-op and provide food vouchers, etc. for clients should they want it?
Not sure about food vouchers. I mean, I don't know if there's anyone from MSD who wants to answer those questions.
Some people are putting some interesting stuff about highly productive land, so make sure to check out the chat if you aren't already. Do you think that the government have plans to support diversification of food production and understand the mātauranga Māori of what the land has provided in the past? This might lead to less land being used for beef and dairy for export, as well as protecting papatuanuku.
One thing I did notice actually in an earlier piece of research was that Ministry for the Environment do actually have kind of a statement or a guide or something like that around protecting mahi Hiakai. I mean, there's probably other people here who know a lot more about this than I do, but it was seemed to be, the idea seemed to be that they were requiring regional and local governments to be working with mana whenua around how to protect mahi Hiakai.
Do you have any insights on how to strategically position national food security to central government so that the local horticulture growers, in particular, who supply domestically, are supported from the power of supermarkets?
So I'm just having another read of that. Yeah, I think really, as I was saying earlier, that I think there's just so many ways that a national food strategy could be positioned. And there's obviously a lot of players in the food system, including a lot of players who've got a lot of power. And I think, you know, that might include, you know, let's say the Fonterras of this world, or, you know, the supermarket chains. So I think that it's really important that we do say that we want a strategy to be around our local and our domestic food production. And, you know, and probably particularly in this case, that local food production. I mean, one of the things that, you know, and this is just my personal view rather than something that came through to me from the reports, but, you know, I've been feeling, you know, with this grocery commission that's being set up, you know, what if that was more focused on how do we not only support, you know, consumers, but also actually support, you know, local communities and the growth of local food economies.
Great kōrero, however, it does not identify many whānau living in poverty can use the strategies to lift themselves out of this dilemma. Many of our whānau have been driven into the cities paying higher rent and higher food prices.
No, absolutely. And yeah, I recognise we didn't go too much into that. I think in the report, we've got about a page or so on that, but you know, really this was around how do we grow food secure communities, and probably I think that you know, what we found with the literature on food security is that differed from the literature on alleviating food insecurity. A lot of that was more focused on, you know, the high rents and the you know, and housing costs and all of those kind of things. So yeah, totally acknowledge that point. Have we had any responses from the Waikato mayors? The two most positive responses we had from mayors were Napier. The mayor told us that she'd sent it to all of the senior leadership and to all of her councillors. And in Aotearoa Christchurch, where again, I think the mayor said that they'd sent it on to all of their councillors.
I don't know if you have any insight, but thank you for this great contribution. Are there any overseas examples leading the way to zero hunger?
I can't say I've led that. One thing I will say is I'd actually probably have to send this later, but there is a really good report. It's actually where I got that quote from the UN Development Programme. And they have, in the last couple of years, started focusing on food and agriculture systems, and they have produced a really awesome report that's, from that international perspective, looking at how do we build the collaborations towards, transforming our food systems. So that's probably quite a good international resource to start with. And I'm sure there's other people who probably have a lot of ideas as well. And, if anyone wants to add that into the comment, we'd love to hear too.
Awesome. Thank you, Sonya, for this amazing report and sharing the wisdom of the communities with us all. It's been wonderful to be able to hear it through another lens and hear how this could be applied in a community setting. So thank you very much. And thank you to you all for turning up today. It's really valuable to understand how people perceive the work, and it's great to see people using and interacting with it as well. You can find the report on the Kore Hiakai website up on the right-hand top corner, Realising Food Secure Communities, and that will take you to the report. So we're going to leave you with one last whittle or challenge. So I invite you to take one last deep breath. What is a step or action that will help to realise food security in your area? And who is involved in that? I want you to harness your imagination and to visualise what that ideal looks like and who is with you on this journey. So, tēnā koutou katoa. We hope that learning from other communities and tapping into our collective imagination, where we are all a little bit closer to realising food secure communities. Thanks again, everyone, for coming today. We'll be sending out a short survey, so if you could take the time to do that, we'd really appreciate it. If there's nothing more, we'll be closing up with a karakia. Me karakia tātou. Ka whakairia te tapu, kia wātea ai te ara, kia tūriki, kia whakataha ai, kia tūriki, kia whakataha ai. Haumi e, hui e, taiki e. Mā te wā, everybody.